all, it's Emily Rand with ESPN Esports, and I'm pleased to be joined by Raz, the current Golden Guardians Academy coach, and also a former LPL caster in both the Riot cast and also the original LPL English cast.
Bless.
All the way back when I was trying to watch Insec and whatever he was up to in season 4. Those great Starhorn OMG series that were
amazing. Like, I remember I still go back because those VODs are still available, but thank God that no one sees it. Because that was such
I go back to them, honestly.
Yeah. I did the cast that I did back then were actually the the expansion tournament for the LPL, and the promotion tournament into the LDL. So like I saw ADG and Cass them come into the scene, like that was really cool. But I was just so raw back then. That was my first real cast. So yep.
Was that the one that Soldra fell asleep for? Also?
Yes.
And then Kelsey had to cast it. Yeah, those were good times. That was a fun. That was a fun moment in like English speaking LPL fandom for me.
It just was the passion back in the days. The fact that it was really just a community level, which I really enjoyed from like what Kelsey set up. It was amazing stuff, and just being able to have that like tight-knit community that I could really work off of. Like, because back then I was also just, I guess, a bit of a blogger. I wrote a few articles, and I would kind of, double check and check up with Kelsey to see if they were actually proper. They were mostly about LSPL players at the time and teams, and so good memories, good times.
Who's the one, just out of curiosity, who's the one LSPL player that you can say, you can take credit and be like, I scouted, and then they made it big in LPL, just out of curiosity. Nice. Really?
Yes. Yeah, because at the time he was the Fizz top laner. Like, I think he was playing AP Fizz at the time. And so he was
not surprising whatsoever.
He was spamming like most nonsensical champions. Like, the Fizz was something that everyone was so afraid of, they were just banning every game. And so I was like, this guy is an insane carry top laner in the third-party tournaments. He played like the AD crit LeBlanc that everybody loves. And then he goes into his first split in the LPL and just plays Maokai. And I'm like, well, I mean, what can you really do at this stage? But I was singing.
Look, they had other draft priorities that they had to tackle, aka Beast and Baka needed very specific champions every game.
They just changed their style. They went into the LPL and said, well, we're not going to use, I forget what the Reborn or something, like they had a Chinese jungler at the time, and they replaced him with Beast and Ella, like the Korean jungle and support that were like completely different styles. So suddenly there's, protect the Kog'Maw comps. That was it.
Yeah, it was a fun time. For this LPL final, because I did want to focus on that more than anything else. I was surprised by a few things I saw. So this is the one series that I called accurately, both in result and in like game length. So 3-2 for JDG. Yeah. I'm not good with predictions. I don't think, to Kelsey's point on our last show, any LPL person is ever, if you're an LPL analyst, you kind of are always setting yourself up to fail with predictions, I feel, pretty much on the regular. But there were still, like, despite that, there were still a ton of things that actually surprised me about this series. So I wanted to start there. Like, what was the biggest surprise for you, and what were you expecting going into it versus the result?
Funny enough, what I expected was JDG to be the smarter team in how they played the map. I thought the decision making from Top Esports coming into their series, not only just the regular season, but also some of the playoff games that they had were just subpar, but at the same time they were just better players, and so they came out of laning phase with huge leads, and they came out of like team fights just playing them out better mechanically. But in the finals, it was actually Top Esports that were making the better early game calls. Karsa actually had really good players in comparison to Kanavi. Kanavi actually started off a lot of these, specifically game 1, but I think off the bad foot. So I was really surprised that Top were the smarter team. But then the second point I was also surprised of were, let's see, first one was that. The second one, I mean, there were a lot of surprising points, right? Mine was mostly on how Knight's performance actually waned. I thought Knight
Mm.
played poorly in the finals in comparison to how like dominant he was in the regular season. He looked like a. Not only was the team bad. I mean, going through this show, I'm going to be talking about this more primarily, but like he had bad Lissandra performances. His team was also bad at using Lissandra, so it was like a double whammy. And then on top of that, when they swapped him up to top lane in the final game, because just for the matchups, so he would get the Ornn matchup. He just died to turret. He not only did he die to turret because he overextended, but also he had bad wave management in which he was just opening himself for a gank when Karsa was pathing down bot lane. So like overall, like he had some pop-off performances on his Corki, was a good one, but he just had a bad series, and he will honestly look back in that series and have like obviously like deep regrets about how he played during it.
I've talked to like a lot of players and coaches as the meta has opened up a lot over the past few years, and one of the things that I think they've kind of continuously stressed is how difficult it actually is to make the swap from a short lane like mid to a long lane.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to piggyback on that and say that I loved the swap like conceptually.
Yep.
Because I was like, okay, this draft is pretty and then when I saw what they were going to do, I was like, oh, this is actually super smart. And then it turns out Knight has no idea how to play the long lane whatsoever.
It's funny because one of the harder things about a mid laner moving up to a longer lane, just top lane in general, is the repetition behind it. Like how throughout the entire season, you've probably just been playing mid lane primarily throughout solo queue, and then in scrims, you're going to have a handful of games, if any, in which you're actually playing top lane. And so you're missing out in that conversation that you're having with your jungler on which lanes you would want him for, like which wave that you would kind of expect him to be on. And so if you're putting yourself in that position, you're either putting yourself in a position where you're playing a non-impactful matchup where your jungler is just not going to look at your lane and you're just going to play the waves accordingly, or you have to be vocal. Like you actually have to be vocal on when you need your jungler hovering for your lane, or what you want out of that matchup. And Knight, as strong as he is, I think being vocal is something that I've heard that like it's not a quality, right, that he has. So I think for him specifically, that would be really difficult. And obviously, I don't have any eyes on like what he does during practice, but what I saw in that game was just unfamiliarity playing in that lane. Either that, or he's in a game 5 in a finals, and he just
and he just is nervous. Like so as someone who does coach, how like just if you had to guess, obviously you, like you said, you had no idea, but like how much do you think they practice this? Or do you think it's one of those things where they get to draft and they're like, this is going to be a really smart decision, which I actually agree with. It is a smart decision to go for those matchups. And then the players are like, okay.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell because the specifics about why they ended up moving the matchup was because, when you see a Kassadin picked on 5 like that, you do want to actually, that's a huge punish to have the Aatrox mid, or just like anything that can push them in and make it hard for the Kassadin to prosper. So like a lot of the times it's so case by case, and like personally talking about when we would have swaps like in like GGA, like it was pretty infrequent, like really infrequent. At the beginning of the split, probably more frequent, and it'd be depending on. We like human swapping is what we would call it, where you're actually sending a person to the other lane matchup. That would happen pretty infrequently. What would happen frequently is just taking the champion and picking him on lane. Like, hey, you know what? I'll just play Ornn. Like, hey, I'll play Aatrox instead, and I'll play Aatrox mid. And you can play Sylas top, right? That I'm comfortable with the champion, less comfortable with the lane what lane I'm being put into. So that's what it showed, that maybe Knight didn't want to play Aatrox in that situation, or maybe like 369 didn't want to play Sylas. Like, I don't know what happened there, but at the end of the day, something happened, and it didn't work out well for him.
So I think I'm gonna kick off my JDD discussion with an apology to Lumao, who I have previously kind of cited as someone who I always thought was a smart player, who has good pocket picks, but sometimes does not have the hands to match a lot of other LPL supports. Like when I think of, and part of this also could just be that my standard for LPL supports is like really high. I think there are so many incredibly like mechanically gifted LPL supports that it's difficult to, it's a tough competition, right? But I don't know if Jarrett has already queued up the Lumao Bard ult, because I definitely want to show it. So our producer will cue that up in a minute. But his Bard almost, I mean, obviously we just talked about the lane matchup, the lane swap, role swap, human swap, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That happened, which is honestly an integral part of what happened in the early game, right? Like, and why top were already kind of on the back foot. But they did look like they kind of were going to end up having the upper hand in some of these team fights anyway. And there was one team fight where it went horrifically wrong with the Bard ult, and then there was this Bard ult in the mid lane that was just like, you could see exactly how this JDG composition was supposed to work, and it relied almost solely on the timing of that ult. And that's that's a ton of pressure to put. Like, you are basically saying, like, we trust you implicitly with this champion that is not necessarily meta. Like, I don't think Bard's bad, but I don't think he's like a cornerstone of current compositions right now, right? He's a pocket pick that Lumao has, that we know he has. It's like that and Fiddlesticks, I would say, are his two like things that he's known for playing in an off meta situation. And he hits it. And he hits it the first time, and then he hits it again later when they're already like starting to snowball off this team fight, because they get Baron immediately after. And to have that kind of faith in one of your players is, whenever that happens on any team, I just think it's a really amazing moment. And this was Lumao's moment, right? Like, this is where, and I've talked about this with LPL teams that people might be less familiar with in the West. These kind of finals, these kind of stages, despite the fact that it's obviously not with a live audience, they did have them in basically a closed like green screen set kind of thing in the where I assume is like the Shanghai Super Brand Mall. Like, I assume that's where they had it, since all the teams are in Shanghai. To have that kind of moment in front of an incredibly large audience is just insane, and the confidence that JDG had in them in him to hit that is also insane.
Yeah, he was. The point about Bard, like, Lumao's Bard is great, and there are a few Bards within the LPL. Like, Dwan's a really good Bard. Lumao is also a strong Bard player that you do want to see them on that champion, right? When it's when it's meta, when the time is right. And Braum is a perfect matchup, honestly. Like, Braum is a very non-impactful champion in the lane, so Bard can get out of it. Bard's actually fairly tanky as you get out of lane, especially with a lot of the support item changes that gets him to have more sustain throughout the matchup. And on top of that, be pretty tanky as the game rolls on. And then if you're dealing with a Sejuani, Braum, and in this case, what was it again? The AD carry, Aphelios, getting on top of him is so damn impactful. And they had MFL too. Actually, like, Loken's MFLT combined with that Bard ulti was perfectly timed. Like, he would pre-ult just so, like, Aphelios honestly needed to either flash out of it or he was just dead. And
that's the thing they messed up before. Yeah. In the team fight before this, they completely messed it up, and top kind of, just killed them.
Yep. And, like, I think that JDG throughout the series had, I mean, it was back and forth, but, like, that specific draft I really appreciate out of it. Like, as much as people believe, I also agree that, like, Aphelios is a really strong champion, and, like, in certain comps, like, really busted. But going up against him, like, Aphelios does not want to deal with range in general. I'm talking about, like, Azir. MF ulti is a really good one. That's why a lot of the times you see MF in response. Not only is she a stronger laner, but she's also just, like, so oppressive in team fights that pushes Aphelios back and delays him from being impactful in a lot of these fights. it's just hard to deal with. Ornn is another one. Yeah, Ornn. If you're Aphelios, when Ornn presses his ulti, it's like, all right, well, I'm gonna have to look at my watch and wait at like maybe 4 seconds on.
This is basically a composition that tells Jackie Love, "Hey,
yep.
we're coming for you, buddy." Like
exactly. Either you're dead or you're waiting. And it's hard for an Aphelios to play around that. So that's why Jackie Love in this game was honestly didn't feel impactful, because what could he do? He was honestly waiting on the rest of his team to do something. And Braum, naturally in this comp, can't do too much. So love the pick for Bard. And also I just thought that I thought that Lu Mao had been a pretty good support. I've always loved him. I thought conceptually, as you mentioned, he had strong concepts on how matchups should be played. So he picked up, like, he was the first one in the LPL that picked up the Volibear going into Yuumi, right? He was always someone that wanted to pick something different. Fiddlesticks was another one that he always like found it like picked up. So like he was not only really a commander for his team, but he was also just incredibly creative. And thank God his mechanics are getting better. So I think that, so like that one's been great. So I think this has been a long time coming for Lu Mao.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking back like after this, just looking at his career, and you forget like how long he's kind of been around, right?
Yes.
Like he, you know, he's been on JDG since what, almost the beginning, right?
Oh yeah, he's been on JDG for yeah.
And then before that, he was in the LDL. He was not a player that people were kind of, he wasn't one of these young players that people were like, as soon as you turn 17, you know, like we have a lot of players like that in LDL, where like it's just like you're going up, like you're already practicing with the LPL squad, you know, you're going straight in. He wasn't one of those players either, so I mean, I think this was definitely his moment. I wanted to give a shout out to that just because I have kind of criticized him in the past. I know you wanted to go through some stuff game by game, so I'll turn the floor over to you, starting with game 1.
Sure. Going on to a few things in game 1 that I wanted to pick out that I thought were impactful. First of all, can you hear me? I feel like my Discord's been going a little wild. Okay.
I can hear you. Oh, no, you did. Okay. Raz ducked out for a minute.
Oh, no. Am I back?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know,
you just need to turn your camera on.
Discord just doesn't like me. I guess maybe it's better now. But yeah, in game 1, I thought that what you saw out of Kanabi was pretty unfortunate. Like he picked the Olaf into the top lane matchup, or at least into Lee Sin. He had an Ornn top side, and if you look at the composition that they had, you just wanted him to full clear. He couldn't really do much to impact bot lane. Same goes for mid. In fact, the LeBlanc Olaf into Lissandra Lee Sin is just not good. There's not much you can follow up on LeBlanc, and you get kited for days by Lissandra and Lee Sin. So like, there's not much he can do in that one really early on. And you pick the Olaf just so you can be able to farm out and just get an experience advantage over Lee Sin, and there's not much that he could do about that. But he was actually baited into going full clear top into top lane gank, and he only got a flash out of it. And so I was like, oh no. Now Lee Sin has an experience advantage, and that actually kept up for a long time in that game. And then the major point that I wanted to make after that fact was, that was my first criticism. The second criticism is, I don't think Top Esports knows how to play well with a Lissandra. The Lissandra pick I felt was really smart. Obviously, a great matchup into the LeBlanc, and also Lee Sin LeBlanc is just a great duo. My issue with their Lissandra pick was how they played around Rift Herald, number one. In the setup of Rift Herald, I don't think there's a lot of LPL teams that actually can consistently do it properly, or at least when I say properly, I mean in a way in which the enemy team can't fight you, at least in an even number situation, right? What ended up happening in that play was Top Esports you sent their dual lane up towards Rift Herald. They didn't have a big enough wave, and also they moved before the Rift Herald spawned, so the jungler actually didn't even get it to like half HP, where the enemy team had to give it up. And when you're looking at that, it's like, okay, well, top esports are pretty much setting up for a fight, right? The enemy team is going to be in position to contest Rift Herald, and you have a Lissandra. It's not necessarily bad that you're making it so that they have to fight you in an even number, but at least set it up properly. And Lissandra was actually sitting in the pixel bush, and if you know how to play around Rift Herald, sitting in the pixel bush and your team is just all on Rift Herald, there is nothing your team can do to actually do, like, they can't do anything off of the engagement.
Yeah, what you're gonna do.
Exactly. Yeah. If you do anything, they'll be like, all right, let me follow up in 5 seconds, and then the fight's going. And that's number one. If you're the Lissandra in this situation, either you're on Rift Herald and you're setting up like inside the pit so you can flash the enemy team when they cross a certain line of scrimmage that your team is called out on, or you sit behind the pit, or you sit in another bush entirely. You just want them to fully commit into river, so then you can fight. Your team can follow up properly. Everything is easy. But no, what ended up happening was Lissandra gets picked. She gets like chunked to a great degree. I still think top esports win the fight, but it wasn't clean. And then it kind of goes, and that wasn't the first time that ended up happening. It happened in basically every objective setup this team had around Lissandra. They had flopped on that. So that's why I felt it felt pretty bad, because that game was decided by top esports not being able to know how to close. Like, they also had Lissandra go, into a 2v1 kill, and like attempted kill on towards
yeah.
And I was like, well, let's see if no, they couldn't do it. And then JDG outscaled. And then another example, to kind of talk about the Lissandra more as a concept for how top esports didn't know how to play around it, was in game 4, I think it was, where the Lissandra was picked once again. Yeah, game 4. And 23 minutes into the game, another dragon fight starts off. Lissandra teleports into a position in which they can fight around it. But once again, they're not committing to dragon. Like, the enemy team is not close enough to commit, number one. And then number two, Lee Sin also goes behind the pit. Yeah, it's actually being shown on the stream right now. So Lee Sin actually just sacrifices himself for no reason. You didn't need Lee Sin to join in that fight. So that's not even necessarily a fault of the Lissandra, but the Lissandra does need to have a voice in how fights are set up. That you want the enemy team to commit a little bit more earlier on. And if you do feel like you can just start the fight in that location, if that's where the line of scrimmage is being set, then Lee Sin, you don't need to do anything. Just
I think like this has been something that like Knight and so my main criticism of top like all year has been that I don't think Knight and Karsa have been on the same page. In fact, I think it was Jordan who, when he came on, said that they have anti-synergy and that like they actually actively make each other worse because they're not making the same decision. And I think that really showed in Knight's Lissandra games.
I think one thing that's the most important thing in a mid jungle, like if you have two of the strongest mid and jungles, and but the problem is that one of them is supportive and the other one is supportive, then you're like, wait a minute, like what are we actually doing here? And also, I'm not saying that Knight is supportive. I'm just more so talking about how, like, who is the demanding one in the relationship. In this sense, it would be Knight. Knight is the one who's demanding. And this would be dipping into speculation, of course, but I would say that this has been a constant with Knight in XX, or like how Knight operated in Young Miracles, where Knight, once again, is not the most vocal player. Like, he is incredibly strong. You do know that you need to set him up to succeed, but like specific timings are still an issue on how you want to set up a specific engage, or how your 2v2 if you're playing Lee Sin LeBlanc or Graves Lissandra, like all of like basically these concepts you want to have hammered out and you want to be on the same page. But that would take a little bit longer if someone is not as doesn't hash that out, or is not able to clearly communicate, or just simply just be on the same wavelength. That would be literally my only critique to Knight in previous relationships and what I saw with Knight and Karsa. And to be honest, even with that point being made, I didn't think Karsa was the best jungler in the LPL coming into this split. I thought that He was probably number 3. I had Tien and Meteor actually in 1 and 2.
Okay.
Now
that's actually, I mean,
this was like
not a controversial opinion, I guess, but like I can see why you'd say that.
Yeah, and this was like coming into Spring Split. So like a lot of people would have forgotten Meteor simply because of how BLG performed this split. And it was horrific. And you never know how much of that relationship was on Kuro at that time. But, you know, that's why mid-jungle, the duo, matters a lot. How much they play with each other in solo queue, how much they converse about the game, like in scrims and all of that. And I think that was probably what ended up happening between them, because they weren't clean throughout the split. But in this specific series, while Karsa looked much better individually, what I saw throughout the series was bad moments from specifically like the mid laner, but also just like them once again being on different pages, specifically on Lissandra. Because if you're pulling out Lissandra, you must have played it a few times in practice, and it just
he's played it before. Like on top, and he's looked really, really good. So I mean, and obviously that was with a different jungler. So that was.
And one thing to take note of is like people will think of Lissandra, and I think the LPL will think of Lissandra in the same way, as like they will simplify it to what she is as a pick champ, right? Like the idea of just, okay, well, you'll rotate her towards the bot side of the map, find a pick, easy, and like that's how you play and then like if you get a few of those out there, then the game ends. But like Lissandra is much more than that, because she is on a timer most of the time, especially in the games in which they played her. Like the enemy team would outscale, at least from the AP that they had in that team, right? And so like you need to be able to play around neutral objectives as well as humanly possible. That she is more of a setup champion. So if you can't play well around your mid laner being set up in utility, then you probably shouldn't play that style.
I'm going to skip ahead to game 3 because I know you had something to say about the early red buff skirmish. I have a lot to say about this game for a few reasons. One, because I do feel that this is more of what I kind of expected to see from JDG in some of their drafting and some, like, specifically some of their lane picks. Yeah. Like, when I think of where both of these teams are smart, I actually think Top has a better understanding of how to play the mid game than JDG does, especially around like neutral objective setups. But I also think that JDG's early game consistently has been a lot stronger. And part of that is because a lot of the time, Top, I think, do like to, or at the very least when they were trying to find their footing before getting Jackie Love, they did try to like kind of slowly snowball and then go to like slightly later game team fights. So JDG in the first 2 games, I was kind of surprised at how inactive they were early.
Yeah.
By comparison to what I'd seen from them in the season. And then this game comes around and we have this red buff skirmish, and I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you want to talk about this.
Yeah. It felt bad, man, because like I actually had like a decent conversation with someone that contested the point that I had, because I had talked about this in prior shows and about the idea for the fight, because like Karsa actually played the first 3 minutes out perfectly. He knew he didn't have prio in bot lane, so he was like, okay, I'm gonna get my blue buff contested, so I'm gonna do Raptors into bot clear. And so when Trundle went towards his blue side, he's like, oh, it's already gone, right? Great. Now Gragas, who will have problems in getting priority in both mid lane and bottom lane, is able to get his full clear, be completely fine. And he ends up top lane because he still needs to get red buff and Krugs. And he can hover for Jace, basically. So he's there, and he basically neutralizes what Trundle wants to do. Issue is, takes Color Crab, realizes that Trundle's on his red buff, and like I think it's completely fine if you double back and you just want to go for a smite fight. You're not committing to a fight. You're not beholden to a fight because you're so close to your own turrets and your own base that if you miss the smite, completely fine. You can try to go for your red buff. I mean your Krugs, because you'll have smite then. If you know, and you're also closer to the Jace, by the way. So you're closer to the matchup that's benefiting you, farther away from the matchup in mid lane that's not. So it's better in that framework. And even if you get pushed off that, it's still okay. Like, it's still fine. You've completed your objective. You're like a little bit behind of the Trundle, but your point in this game, your goal was to get your mid lane covered for, your bot lane not put in an awkward situation, and to cover your top lane. Everything he's done that. He goes to his red buff, already smite is gone. Like, he had an opportunity, I guess, but he hesitated. That's fine, whatever. It's gone. He still looks for the fight anyways.
Yep.
And the Jace is like already committed to like doubling into the fight. I was like, all right, well, Renekton, by the way.
I was gonna say, and you're up against a Renekton, so.
Yeah, so like this is double press the attack on Trundle, Renekton, and you're only working off a very small window in which Jace is gonna be there first. The mid lane, like, Knight's gonna have nothing to do with it. He's low in mana, low in HP. He's a Quirky going up against an Azir. Azir's gonna be there first, and he's gonna be more impactful. And Trundle has flash, so Trundle can actually just delay for the 3 seconds in which Jace is gonna be there first. And so he does that. Renekton gets there, easiest kill onto the Gragas. There is like only, and the thing is, talking about the mindset, there is a small probability in which like that JDG loses that fight, and that's if Kanavi just walks into the only window in which he doesn't have Renekton into the bush and just dies to the Jace and Gragas. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. He plays it patiently, and like 10 out of 10 times, that should be a win for the Trundle. Yeah. It obviously like changes the rest of the game. The impact is huge because then Trundle knows where you're pathing, buddy. Like, he has like a good idea of your clear. He can just meet you at your wolf camp. He does that. I think he kills him again. It's over. Like, from a jungle matchup perspective, he has now made you irrelevant. And I was so sad when I saw that, because you didn't have to do that. And I mean, that's, rest in peace.
So, to anyone who actually watched this game, it was like, shocker, it was not over, because this is kind of the epic Baron throw that I think. Yeah. I mean, people were talking about multiple Baron setups throughout this series, and how ill-timed some of them were. Let's just say, or not well coordinated. Some of them were, and this was kind of Knight's shining moment of. Yes. The Quirky goes in and just destroys everyone, and top actually end up winning this game, which was. And
think of it this way.
It was a rough watch, because like I was like, okay, they mess up at Karsa goes in for that fight. Yeah. The game is over. The game was theirs. Like, all they had to do was close it out.
And think of it this way: Top Esports should have easily won game 1. With how they were set up to succeed. Then they win game 2. It actually could have easily been a 3-0 series based off of just like, if the game was played, like, of course, just in terms of probability of how things could have played out. And game 1 is easily it would have been theirs. Funny enough, because of how, remember that situation in game 1 in which Knight actually went on Scuttle Crab as his team was sneaking Baron. I know people will talk about, and Jordan actually talked about this as well, why are you sneaking Baron at this point anyways? But it also, just, if he didn't walk on Scuttle Crab, it would be
they fine. Can see you.
Yeah. But like, all of this leading up to game 3, Knight could have, Top Esports could have had a 3-0 finish. But it's crazy how much the game 3 result kind of impacted the series as a whole. Because even JDG, after the game in interviews, we're talking about how actually the question from the interviewers specifically was like, what was the hardest point of the split? Like, hardship. And I think it was Kanavi that was like, oh yeah, actually after game 3.
Like, whoop.
After game 3, like, it was a bit of a mental boom because they had a huge advantage and they had lost it in such a insane fashion, right? In a finals setting. So like, you would think, oh, is that recency bias? No, that's your finals, and you just lost in an insane situation. You're probably the most tilted you've been in throughout the entire split. So really funny. And yep, it just kind of painted what the series as a whole looked like. Entertaining for sure. It was incredibly
entertaining.
Yeah.
And incredibly back and forth. Let's get to game 4, because I know you want to talk about the dragon fight. Later on in that. I already talked about game 5, so we'll bookend the series, or like we'll put a cap on the series after this. But I know you want to touch upon dragon fight in game 4.
Yeah, thankfully I already kind of touched on it. For me, it was just pretty tragic on the Lissandra point because it really was about top esports throughout the series, kind of dropping the ball on how they set up for major objectives. You know, having their focus on Dragon is great. This is their sole point, by the way. Like this caps the game for them pretty easily. In a 2-1 situation, this would have been a 3-1 series if they had gotten Mountain Soul. But once again, they lose their jungle out of this. They end up losing Dragon out of this. And it goes back to the entire point about my issues of top esports prior to having Jackie Love, prior to having Karsa, was that, first of all, they got smarter. They did get better. Karsa did improve them as a team in their decision making. I would like to believe, even though Jackie Love only had like a little bit of time with them, that they also improved in terms of that as well. They just needed experience in their lineup.
I've heard and I know they said in a few of their playoff interviews, I think, that he is like an incredibly strong voice. Yeah. Which kind of makes sense because I mean I feel like IG is definitely a team where you probably have to yell to be heard.
And also, they also have BSYY, which is another thing in which we've sung praises about their coaching staff in the past as well. Coming into this, this is a completely concept-based issue that they have, because it may be Lissandra now, but it's probably going to be Galio the next time. If Galio becomes back into the meta, then you need to kind of get through this and how to set up for how to rope an enemy team into you, so that they're coming into an objective, how to tie them in, how to best set up your control wards. And I think maybe this was also kind of their setup wasn't as good in this series because they brought in Chocho. Maybe it was a bit about the lack of because did you hear about my criticisms towards the support?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think so I agree with your point. I do think the reason why they started Chocho is because Yuyanja had so many highly questionable decisions in their previous playoff match, which I know Kelsey and I kind of both touched upon, especially some of the I just keep seeing that mid lane Alistar play over and over in my head, and it's just.
And I guess that's what it comes down to.
I mean, he's really young, right? I don't want to sit here and say that Yuyanja is terrible, because I don't think he is. I actually think he can probably be a really good support. He just needs experience. But I do think that's why they went with Chocho, despite the fact that he hadn't practiced with the team as much.
And that's in part to the major issue that the top had in the series around objectives, was that the setup for objectives weren't strong enough, and then the execution also wasn't good as well. And it was pretty heartbreaking in the sense of you get behind a team like top, and I'm happy regardless of which team wins, right? Because I think JDG deserved it. The story of Loken going up against his former team, where people criticized his performance when he was on top and saying
they blamed him for losing. They solely fans solely blamed Loken for the fact that top esports did not go to Worlds last year.
So I'm happy no matter what, because I've heard the criticisms from the fans where they blamed Loken and said that Fodic, who came in, would be a better AD carry, or they kind of thrown all these players. But that wasn't why they lost in Gauntlet. That wasn't why they had problems as a team. It was not because of Loken. It was because they just had awful end game decision making. That was a shot caller issue. Actually, it was my biggest thing was if we go into the next split, I want to keep Loken. I want to change XX because he wasn't a smart jungler. He was a jungler that focused so much on what was in front of him, right? He was a very brute force jungler. So I thought they made an amazing call by getting Karsa. So that's going back to the point in which I was making was I'm happy no matter which team wins, because the story of Loken taking that kind of vengeance and proving himself on that stage, I love that. And then on the other side of top esports, Knight getting the championship finally and putting him his name down in the history books in LPL is much deserved. But the problem that top esports consistently has now is that they don't have the brain in these final moments. In these final moments, they get outdone by in the past an RNG and IG, these teams that, while everyone praises them for having the better mechanical players, top will look at that and say, okay, we just need to boost our team mechanically then. Now we have the better players, but then still have these issues of like, well, we still lack the end, like how to end a game, how like lane allocations when we have a huge advantage, or set up for the final objectives. Because like they lost 2 games, not only this Mountain Soul that we were just talking about, but also at a time in which they were setting up for third dragging or something, and then Lee Sin gets picked. I think this was in a prior game, and you're just like, if this team had kind of really worked on, I guess to a certain degree, coaching staff issues, or just a general focus on the coach or like the mind of the game, then they would be better.
I mean, I think they have the good thing about it, despite the fact that we just talked about how this has been a problem for them historically. The good thing is that I feel like they have changed out enough pieces and they've improved. Like you saw them, like as much as I have criticized Knight and Karsa together, I do think their synergy has improved from where it was in the beginning of the split, like by a significant margin.
Yeah.
And then additionally, I do think that Jackie Love coming onto this team has given the team a much needed loud voice, because when I think of Karsa and when I think of, I mean, I can only go based on what I've heard of Knight. I've talked to Karsa about this individually, and he's said so in interviews where he does a lot better as like a secondary voice when someone else like Sword Art is kind of the shining example, or Uzi, like someone with a really loud, dominant voice when push comes to shove is going to make those calls and he'll follow them. I think that this team with Jackie Love is still going to be a title contender in summer.
And
now the question is like, do they let that kind of always runner-up thing start to get to them for some of the players who have been around since last year?
And I think Jackie Love will be that voice that will push them out of that. Because if you have a former champion to his nature, and another thing is like someone who was removed from that environment for so long being added in, then I don't think there'll be an issue to that mentality within the team. I think so I'm not too concerned about that. My only concern is that, once again, Karsa is known for being such a smart, methodical jungler. The next step for him is to have a louder voice. Because while I do believe that top esports going into the next split, like I would even call them a favorite. I think there are issues to IG. We won't know what will happen with RNG, I'm sure. Like it might just be a JDG versus top esports again, or an FPX, whoever gets thrown in there. I expect top esports to be there. They just need to be, if we have that faith in Karsa, having Karsa be the voice in the team. I never really like it in which there is a guy that you kind of push to be a major brain of the game. He's great mechanically as well, but that's the value that he has. But he's not your first voice nor your final voice. So I guess it may not be an issue if Jackie Love is going to be there and he's going to be covering for that. But I'd really want that to be the next step of Karsa in his career.
So to put a bookend on the series, I know you talked about it on Something Insight. It's the inevitable question: if we had an MSI, despite the issues that we saw from both teams in this finals, how well do we think that JDG would do at an international competition with the teams that qualified? I already answered this on a previous thing. Okay. I put my faith in JDG more based on how I thought the round robin bracket would turn out. Basically, the way that I saw teams picking with the matchups, I actually had T1 coming out first because I don't have faith in JDG to come out number one. I don't have faith in any LPL team to come out number one in round robin, to be honest. Especially single game round robin. So I'll never bet on an LPL team to come out first. When IG did it last year, I was just like, what is even happening in life? But yeah, I did end up picking JDG because of matchup, but I said it would be really, really messy. And most of their series would look like this, where it'd be like a 3-2. Yeah.
I would have it as first things first, I would have SKT, or at least T1, coming out of bracket stage as number one, of course. I think I just flatly think that T1 right now is the best team in the world, and that G2 would be second best. G2 is probably the hardest one to kind of call, just because it felt like they had gotten so much better by the time their finals came through, that their Mad series was definitely a kick at the in the butt. They just needed to improve, and also just improve in how they thought about their draft. So I felt like they had that adaptation. I will say the hardest thing about predicting for bigger events is not so much which team is the favorite coming in, but which team makes the correct adaptations.
Yes.
Every world has been the same conversation where it's like it's usually never. I can't say that now that FPX has won, but like first seed that wins it, it's usually like second seed or third seed that comes in with a stronger concept, but like they get better throughout the entire event. Be it Samsung that loses to RNG and then eventually comes in and takes the whole thing. So like for MSI, I would put that question on C9 and G2 and how they would adapt. I don't think C9, as strong as they are, would be in the finals. I think they would push a JD. I think they would. Ooh, it's really tough with C9, but I would say that it would be a finals between T1 and G2. I think unless if the bracket literally makes it impossible for it to happen. My issue with LPL teams going into MSI were that it was just a wholesale downgrade in terms of how teams were coming in from summer to spring. FPX got worse because they were managing like the whole top lane issue, and on top of that, I just thought they were just worse on the in their early games. Especially
I thought Tiana and Crisp looked worse.
Yeah,
like, and that to me is like the strength of FPX is like their early game decision making and roaming.
To be more specific as well, I thought their setups around Rift Herald were pretty bad, especially to the teams that just didn't make it into playoffs. Their last 3 series that they had going into the playoffs were
the Rogue Warriors one.
So the Rogue Warriors one was bad. The LGD one was horrific. LGD actually conceptually played their games better. Like, they played Rift Herald better. They got the advantage on the first push, and then LGD just consistently played poorly mechanically in fights. So like you can't control that. But FPX were actually the dumber team in comparison to LGD, and LGD is not even a playoff team. So it just felt so bad watching FPX in that kind of setting. I have faith that they'll get back to World's form, but once again, FPX looked weaker. IG had lost to Jackie Love. That one already they had looked weaker, and on top of that, the Shy is just not performing well. But he generally doesn't do well in like tank matchups, anyways, or at least like playing tanks. So like IG looked worse. RNG of course looked worse. EDG looked worse without iBoy. Like the competition as a whole, while there's more competition, it's because the top echelon had just dropped off. So to be more specific on JDG just lack, once again, more specifically like mechanics, and I think their drafts are just pretty. While they're better than the other LPL teams in drafting, and they play like
it's sometimes a low bar.
Yeah,
like I try to avoid talking about draft. I say this all the time, but like I try to avoid talking about draft objectively because I think LPL teams are like hyper focused on their play styles, and I don't even think that's necessarily a bad thing. But if you are looking at these drafts objectively, a lot of them are bad.
And so like that's where I think JDG would, whether I have faith that they would adapt throughout an international event and drafting, because I thought they were already pretty much doing the right things on their Ornn priority. Maybe prioritizing it too much, but like that's something where it's nice to at least have a priority on Ornn where the rest of the region just does not want to play it at all. So like JDG from that perspective is great, but I still have questions on Yagao and their bottom lane in an international event, because while we're praising them domestically, we still have to recognize they're going up against like Teddy is a great example of it. And G2 I think is just a better team on the map in comparison. So it sucks. I kind of went on for a little bit too long, but my point overall is that I just don't think JDG
I was curious. Because my opinion is actually, so this is pre-swap back. I'm actually super glad that G2 already announced that they're going to be doing the swap back. Because I think this is a team that like now they swap back. Obviously I have to see them play, but like it's another team that I'm like, okay, this team can win worlds like very easily. Like I love that iteration of G2. No offense to Caps, you improved in the bot lane, but not enough. I do think a pre-swap G2, like to your point about LPL, I actually think that happened across the board. With the exception of, actually, it's tough to compare them to previous Team Liquid because I really like this C9 team. I think they're doing things in North America, and like you might disagree with me because I feel like compared to how people have talked about C9 in the year when I've seen you talk about them, you've been slightly more metered, I guess, in your opinion, like more measured. But I think the thing I do like about C9 is that I think North American teams have a problem with proactivity, and C9 is finally a team that's willing to do things early. And that's huge to me, like absolutely massive, because that's always my issue with any NA team, including Team Liquid last year, despite the fact that they were very obviously the best team in North America.
The funniest thing about a discussion about MSI is that your expectations don't get changed or checked, right? Because I think there are so many people in this right now, they're viewing North America to still be performing poorly at an international event, or that'd be expecting the LPL team to continue to showcase that they're champions, right? Where I looked at this and thought, I think the LPL would have dropped off in this event. I thought JDG or Top Esports would have actually performed worse, and T1 would be a champion or G2 would be a champion. And I think that Cloud9 actually was the best opportunity NA had to perform really well on an international stage.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I absolutely agree. I think Discord might have boomed you again for the time being, but I'll just say to the general stream, there we go. You're back.
Spectrum Internet. My point was like, while people would talk about CLG at a finals or anything, I'm talking about being in a finals event or TL in the finals and being competitive, like being a strong NA representative.
Yeah, not getting like completely blown out. Rio with where it's like, I mean, to your point, CLG, that was not a close final.
That wasn't,
at all.
It wasn't.
There was no doubt that SKT at the time, T1 was going to win that. So.
And so I think C9 could have easily showcased. The reason why I said like my expectation at least is a little bit tempered on how C9 would go up against G2 and T1, only because we've seen T1 and G2 at an international event and how far they've gone, right? But with C9, it's the same discussion that we had about LPL teams in the past. They're fast, they're aggressive, they're talented, but how does that hold up to other smarter teams that can delay these games, right?
And they haven't been exploited by anyone in the region.
Yes, and like competition matters. It's the same discussion we've always had about, the LMS as a region at the time when like Flash Wolves would come out. They would look dominant, come into an international event, and then flop, at least from World's perspective, right? So I wanted to see what C9 would do in a new environment. And it's not to say that they still won't be strong going into summer, but things change. Metas change, relationships change, anything can change, and that's why I want to know right now where C9 would place. So that's why I'm sad.
Yeah, it's my other reason for kind of still going with JDG. Again, like I said, a lot of it was matchup based as to how teams would come out of the round robin, because I do think T1 would be incredibly dominant in all of their single games. I think everyone has gotten a little bit worse since summer. Like what you said about LPL, I actually take that and blanket apply it to all teams. With C9 is still in this weird nebulous spot where like I don't really know where to place them necessarily, because they're playing, like I said, their strength to me is that they're playing differently than a lot of NA teams play. And that has been a massive strength of theirs. So
I will say, just to the point about everyone's playing worse, I think it's a greater degree to LPL. LCK, I'm not too sure about, like, if we're talking about competitively, it's hard to say with how like KT is and all that.
I was never, so as someone who was super happy that KT was winning, because I am like, that's the only team I'm really emotionally invested in as a fan, like from a fan perspective. I was like, how is this team winning? Because they're dumb. They're dumb. Like I did not like how they played at all.
So That one for me was a little harder, but I would say for T1, it was still a really competitive environment. For G2, definitely competitive enough, even though they did look worse because they had the swap, so that's just going to happen. C9 was the only one that I was like, actually, I think I'm not. I would say from a competitive environment also, it was pretty bad. Teams that they had around them, like while teams got better, it never really was enough. So we'll see what ends up happening in summer. That's really the only thing I got to look forward to.
I don't know if you have any final closing thoughts. I'll turn it over to chat to see if they have any questions. A big thing we kind of already touched upon, but Thomas Not the Tank Engine asks, what do you guys think the ceiling is for top esports now that Jackie Love joined at the end of the season? I say LPL title. I think they can definitely win an LPL title in summer.
LPL title, for sure. I think the only thing stopping them is the teams around them. The most important thing being 80 carries. There are not a lot of great 80 carries right now in the LPL. Jackie Love came back, but the idea of Uzi still being a big question mark for me is weird. The competitive pool for 80 carries just got a little slimmer, which I think is unfortunate. Which makes, if we go into the next split, roster is not changed. Top esports, I think, are my favorites to win the finals. They're already the favorites for me to win this one, and I think this lesson for them is going to be a good one.
And then SC2 Fresh Products asked, what are your guys' opinion on the cause of FPX's issues? I basically said whenever you have to split time between two players, it really hurts a team like FPX specifically because their strength is that they're so finely balanced, right? Like this was finally the team where Doinby's playstyle was supported by everyone on the team.
And another thing too is like we talk about this in literally any sport in which like once you like going and getting that championship to begin with, you have all that drive and you have literally everything that you're riding on. Like for Doinby in particular, he didn't know he was going to be playing competitively or not.
Yeah.
And like
he was going to retire.
Yeah. And he was like put in a position where he had failed so much where he needed this. Like everybody has that almost animalistic need to get that championship. And then once you finally have attained your goals, to get back onto that kind of mindset is difficult for a lot of players. And so usually the kicker is to lose. Like I'd say it's actually like a good example.
They did do that.
There we go. Like Doublelift has faced the same thing kind of about like motivation. So maybe FPX after losing in the way that they have, are coming back in the next split motivated. Because to me, changing one player shouldn't do this much of change, right? Like especially top lane. The strength had always been in how FPX played through mid to bot, and you can say that having a carry style top laner will change that. But even in their Gimgoon games, actually, they basic concepts that they had been good at were just not good. So it really is just, I think, partly motivation or whatever. They just weren't able to adapt.
Air T1 asks, with rumors of Tarzan to Vici, which is, can I just say, oof. After his awful split, is he really an upgrade over an established player in the team like Ike's?
Anyone that knows my opinion?
Interesting.
So what do you think of Ike's here, Emily? What's your opinion?
I don't think he's that good, actually. Yep.
Like anybody that knows my thoughts on him, I think he is the worst jungler in the LPL.
I'm not. Oof, that's a tough one. I will say I have not liked his performance since I saw him with the team in Demacia Cup. I think that was the first time I saw them. Anyway, I was like, this is gonna cause issues for the.
I'm a major fan of stock ranking. Like, if I'm gonna make a strong statement about a person, then I want to be able to go through each person, each jungler, and like make my opinion on it. And I went through
on every single LPL jungler.
Exactly. I'm not counting subs because like I'm not comparing him to a sub. He's a starting player. He's getting starting time. Like of all the starting junglers, to me, he was just the weakest starting jungler. So for me, Tarzan is for sure an upgrade. Like Tarzan, even though he had a pretty rough split, I mean, I don't know what happened on that team. I'm not gonna lie, internally or externally, but like Tarzan is a smart jungler. Yeah, Tarzan is a smart jungler. The only thing I will ever say is that if you're coming into the LPL, you got to be, able to fight. It was an issue that Karsa had initially when he came into the LPL. It was an issue with Bengi, like literally any Korean jungler that come in.
Someone inevitably is going to be at your buff at level 2, and you're just like, why are you here? This is not a smart decision, and then they kill you, and you're like, how did this happen?
if you are behind, especially in the LPL, you have to be willing to skirmish to get back into games. If you are ahead, you have to be expecting to pressure the map to keep ahead. And so, like Tarzan, my only criticism to when he was actually having his best split during 2019 last year summer was that my biggest criticism was that if his team was behind, he would do nothing. Like he would wait. He would wait until the enemy team made the most egregious of errors, and even still, like he is not a proactive jungler to the greatest degree. You have to be willing to set up a play to come back in, and he wouldn't do that. But everything else I thought was perfect. So to answer the question, I think he would be a great addition. He just needs to kind of understand what environment he's in.
This actually dovetails nicely into the next question. Are IG's problems too much for them to make it back to Worlds? So putting aside the Shy's inting, because I feel like that's what everyone is kind of over-focused on in their playoffs.
Yeah.
I think a lot of IG's problems actually stem from the jungle position, and I think there are a lot of criticisms you can levy at Ning pretty consistently.
Yeah.
However, I do think that one thing that Ning was really good for with IG when they were on red side, they were drafting all of these counter picks. They were drafting for lane. Yep. Ning knew how to further snowball that very easily, right? He was in lanes at level 2, at level 3, sometimes at level 1. Maybe that wasn't the best decision, but he was there. He was always in lanes, and Leon is not. And I actually think that has been, in my opinion, one of the biggest changes for IG this year, and that has been one of the problems behind some of their issues, despite the fact that we have seen them also have similar issues that they've had in the past, like, why are you picking this team fight when all you have to do is literally wait to scale?
So that's the thing. I think one thing IG needs more than any other team is a double take on what their team identity is. Like, who are they as a team? Last time when they found all that success and were world champions, as you already said, they were the counter-picking team. They picked for lanes. Everyone picked for lanes. They were talented enough to do so. And Ning, all the things that people are criticizing Ning for right now and picking fights endlessly, he did back then.
Oh, yeah. He has not changed.
Yes.
He plays the exact same way.
Yes. It's the team that's changed. So that's why I think they need to talk about what they are as a team. Are they still playing that style, even with Puff and Southwind? If that's the case, then they need to play that style rather than, drafting away from that to a certain degree. Or if they want to change and be a lot more, more of a standard team in how the rest of the league is playing or the rest of the world is playing, then it's more so the Shy and, I guess the jungle that needs to change, because if Ning's not going to change, then maybe you can play Leon and you don't need to be on the map nearly as much. You can just play a more standard game. It's just the issue with them is just, I think, a little bit of, you've lost your AD carry and you didn't expect that. But also, like, they are a team that has kind of need to readdress how they think the game should be played.
And the last important question that we're going to end this on is, who would win a Valorant 1v1, Faker or Scump?
Who's? Oh, no, I don't know who Scump is.
COD player. He's a COD player.
He's a COD player? Faker, you're losing that one, by the way.
I think I'm actually I'm going to have to go with Scump.
Yeah. I think the realization of certain tournaments run by ESPN is that while you are a strong individual player in League of Legends, that doesn't translate to an FPS.
Okay. In fairness, the League of Legends team that played, maybe not the strongest League of Legends team that could have been put forward mechanically.
Oh, no.
Also, Stillwell is yelling at you for not knowing who Scump is.
I'm looking at the chat right now. Look, I'm not clued into everything. In fact, when I was a caster, I was also criticized for not knowing, what was it? A lot of pop culture references. So I needed to just hit the books.
I don't know pop culture references either.
Yeah,
so I
I'm
can't,
just bad at references
I can't
in
yell
general.
at you for that.
I'm Patrick under that rock.
We need to send the green wall to you on Twitter. Oh my god. Okay. I don't think the green wall exists anymore in its original form because Hex split away from Optic. That was like the great COD breakup of this past offseason. But we're not here to talk about COD. We just talked about LPL. The show ran late. Thank you so much for everyone who stuck around. Thank you so much for joining me Raz, and providing your insight on some of these teams. Next week, we're going to have a slightly different show that's kind of in the works. When I know that it will be happening, I will announce it. It's going to take a more holistic look at some, hopefully it's going to take a more holistic look at some of the marketing and merchandising and stuff behind some of the LPL teams, because I think it's something LPL teams do super well. So that's what we're going to be talking about hopefully next week. Thank you for joining me, Raz, again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you about League of Legends, and I love your insight.
Thank you.
And for more LPL and League of Legends and general esports coverage, tune in to twitch.tv/ESPN esports. Thank you so much.